Hi everyone, I'm Linda from Colourwerx Designs and welcome into week number 2 of the ModBlossom QuiltAlong. If you're just joining us this week, you can still start. All you need to do is get the pattern, which is available at our Colourwerx shop. You can order this in both PDF and paper pattern format, and then you need to scour your stash for fat quarters. If you're interested in doing the full lap quilt here that you see, which is 12 blocks, 6 leaf blocks, and 6 flower blocks, you're going to need a fat quarter bundle that has at least 18 fat quarters, plus about 3 yards of background fabric. If you just want to dip your toes in and try 1 flower block, 1 leaf block, you're going to need about 6 fat quarters, about a half a yard of background fabric. This week, which is week 2, is all about getting those fabrics together. We're going to assign those fabrics, give them a duty to do in the quilt. We'll assign them positions, and we're going to make our templates. The first thing you're going to need to do is get that pattern insert out, which came with your paper pattern, or if you ordered the PDF pattern, you're going to have printed this out on 4 pages and kind of taped together template D. We're going to make templates first, and I'll show you this over at the cutting board, and then we're going to take our fat quarters and pair them up and assign them duties. So for instance, I have my beautiful stack of stitchy fabric here from Krista Watson, which you can pre-order from her website at kristaquilts.com. And I'm going to take these over to the cutting board in just a moment and pair them up, maybe in colorizations, and then each one of these pairs will have a duty. For instance, I'll have 2 pinks, and that will make the leaf petals and the flower petals. I might put 2 greens together, and that might become my cornerstones for the flower block. And then might put some black and whites together, and that will become the centers for the flower block, or blues together might become the centers for the leaf block, like you see on your screen there. So with that, let's get started. Let's head over to the cutting board and start cutting these fabrics up and making templates. Right, so the very first thing that you need to do is grab that pattern insert that's in your pattern, the ModBlossom pattern. This is from the paper version of the pattern, and we need to trace these shapes, all of them, there are 4 of them, A, B, C, and D, onto template plastic. So if you have a piece of template plastic in your house, it looks something like this. It's clear, it's translucent, it's a little bit thick, it has a thickness to it. You just put that over there and you trace the shape, and then you cut it out of the plastic. So you would do that there, and if you have a bigger shape, you can actually then tape 2 pieces of template plastic together as well. Now, the other thing you can do is take some spray adhesive like this, or a glue stick, and actually go to the Staples store and have your insert copied, and then spray adhesive a piece of heavy-duty cardboard or a file folder, and then adhere the paper or the Xerox copy of your template onto that cardboard, cut it out, and you will have a template made just like that. Here's template C, okay? Remember, if you did order the PDF version of the ModBlossom pattern, you're going to have 4 pages to print out, and you're going to need to actually make sure that they are printed out on 100%. Make sure that you measure the 1-inch square and that it's measuring 1 inch when you print it out on your printer. That will tell you if you have your printer set to the right settings, which is not scale to fit, but print at 100%. Then you will need to tape together the leaf shape only. This is template D. The other shapes are full size on the paper, and you just print those out. And once you're ensuring that they're 100%, you would just do the same thing. You can either trace these shapes out on template plastic, or as I suggested before, spray, fuse, or glue stick this entire piece of cardboard, and then take your printed out template and fuse it or glue it to the cardboard, and then cut it out. You're going to cut it out on the solid line. So that's our first thing to do this week in week 2 before we start pre-cutting, is to make sure that we get our template shapes cut. Once all your template shapes are cut, you're going to end up with 4 template shapes. So this is D, here comes C, which is that curved part of the leaf. Here comes A, which is part of the flower petal, and B, which is going to be part of the flower petal. So you're going to have 4 templates there, A, B, C, and D. Now we're ready to start pre-cutting our fat quarters. Right. Next, we need to take our fat quarters, whether you've gathered 6 fat quarters because you're just going to make 1 leaf block and 1 flower block, or that you have a fat quarter bundle. We need to take our fat quarters, kind of pair them together any way, which way you want. They can just be 2 coordinating fat quarters of the same color that become a pair, or you could, pair together, colors that match or things that look pleasant to your eye. It doesn't really matter, but we need to pair together fat quarters and assign them duties. So I've got a stack of Krista's stitchy fabric here of these fat quarters. I'm just going to go through and show you some examples. So these 2 pinks I really like together. I think that would be nice. So I'm going to make that my first pair. And remember, 2 fat quarters in will make you the petals for both a flower block and 1 leaf block. So that's going to be the petals of 1 flower, 1 leaf block. These oranges are really nice together too. So this will be another pair of 1 flower, 1 leaf block. These greens are kind of nice together here. And I think I might want to make just 1 leaf block with these. And then with the fabric that I'll have left over from making that 1 leaf block, I can save for perhaps the centers of a flower block or the centers of other leaf blocks. So you can see that you don't necessarily have to assign every pair of fat quarters, especially if you're using a fat quarter bundle. You can actually assign just to make 1 leaf block or 1 flower block out of a pair, and then use the leftovers for the centers of your flower or leaf blocks. These 2 I really like. So these are going to be the cornerstones, these greens, to my flower block. And I'm going to bring that diagram up right now. So you can see I've got a pair of oranges there that become the petals of my leaf and my flower block. I then have some blues put together. Those are the centers of my leaf. And I have some green, whites and blacks put together, and those are the centers of my flower block. I then use that other pair of greens that I just showed you, and those are my cornerstones. So you can see there, if we come back to the cutting board, I've got 1 flower, 1 leaf block, a second flower leaf block here. Maybe these are my cornerstones for my flower blocks. This, and where is it? Let's see. Maybe this, let me grab it, there, that's going to be the center of my flower block. And then maybe these two blues here, I like these 2 blues together, those will be the centers of my leaf block. And I have some other choices here, so I have some other things I can play with as I go forth and make blocks. Again, if you're just dipping your toes in, you just want to try 1 version of each block, you would just need 1 pair, maybe 2 pairs of fat quarters, a pair of fat quarters for your cornerstones for your flower block, and then a pair or scraps for the centers of the flower block and the leaf block. And again, I'll bring that diagram up right here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Once I've paired everything together, then we're ready to start pre-cutting all of our fabric. Right, I'm going to start with my first pair of orange fat quarters. This is going to be 1 flower, 1 leaf block. These are going to make the petals. And if you turn to the cutting diagram that is in your pattern for the fat quarters, which are for your flowers and leaf blocks, which is on the bottom of page 1, it shows you what you need to cut there. Now, the first thing you need to check, because not all fabric companies cut fat quarters exactly the same way, nor do quilt shops, make sure before you start cutting your fat quarters that you have a full 18 inches by 21 inches. Okay, it's okay if a little bit of the selvage gets left in as we cut, if that's really close on the margin there, but some fat quarters end up getting cut for some reason at 18 by 20 or 18 by 19 sometimes. So make sure you've got 18 inches by 21 at least. That's what you need. I'm going to cut both my fat quarters in this pairing together so you can see it. So here comes the other orange fat quarter. I'm going to put it right on top. And if you look at the diagram that's on page 1 of the pattern, it has you cut a 10 1/4 inch two 10¼ inch squares, one 6-inch square, and one 5-inch by 14 7/8 inch strip. So I'm going to take a little shortcut here. I've studied this now, and this is what I do with patterns. I'll study how many pieces have to be cut from each piece of fabric or each fat quarter, and then I try to minimize my cutting strokes, if you will, or steps by putting like sizes together. So I can see that I've got 10¼ inches, so that's a strip, a 10¼ inch strip that needs to be cut, and I've got a 6-inch square that needs to be cut plus a 5-inch strip that needs to be cut. So I'm going to cut a 10¼ inch strip and a 6-inch strip first. And again, I'm now going to flip this way because I'm going to cut the 10¼ inch strip along the 21-inch side. So I can actually fold my fat quarters over together to minimize the length I'm cutting, minimizing the distance I'm cutting so I don't slip. And I'm going to just trim and make myself a straight edge right here first. So I'm grabbing my ruler, make a straight edge, just cut a little sliver off there following the solid line on the cutting board. There you go. And now my first cut is going to be 10¼ inches to make that those two 10¼ inch squares. The next cut is going to be a 6-inch strip. I'm taking my square ruler here. I'm just going to put the 10¼ inch line on that nice clean edge of the two fabrics there. And there you go. I'm just going to put that over there. And the next one, remember, I'm going to cut a 6-inch strip because I have to get a 6-inch square out of each strip, plus a 5-inch by 14 7/8 inch strip. So this is what's left over, that's scraps. And let's deal with this strip here, the 6-inch strip first. So the very first thing I'm going to do is unfold that strip, those two fabrics. Remember, I'm cutting two fabrics at the same time. This is my first pair. And I'm going to cut a 6-inch square from this strip first because that's what I need. So I'm going to put the 6-inch line on the edge, make sure it's 6 inches down here, and there you go, whoosh, I've got two 6-inch squares. Now the next cut out of here has to be a 5-inch by 14 7/8. Actually, that weird measurement of 14 7/8 is to actually accept template A. If you look on page, I think it is 1 or 2 of the pattern, it shows you how template A is laid out. So let's make this a 5-inch strip first of all. It has to be a 5-inch width. Okay, so I'm just going to trim the strip down to 5 inches wide. And then I would take my template A, which I created before we started. That was our first step today. And I'm going to lay it down on the strip like that. And then I'm going to cut it in half like this. Now, normally I would advise you to, if this is not a thick piece of cardboard, I would not cut against it. I would draw the line on the fabric to give yourself a guide. Do not cut against the templates, especially if they're plastic or if they're not heavy-duty, thick cardboard, because you can just keep cutting against the cardboard and whittling away your template. Or more importantly, you might slip with the rotary cutter, and the cardboard is really not as thick as you think it is, and you could actually cut your finger at that point. So I've created that template there. There's a little niche up here that has to get cut out like that. There's template A, and I've created 2 of those at the same time by stacking my fabric. Right, so once I have one template A done, I just need to rotate the template and cut the second template A from that strip. And you'll notice that I didn't cut this down to the 14 7/8 like the directions say, because I'm going to cut that away anyway. So you can either leave it as one long strip and you're going to cut this away, or if you want to cut it down to a 5-inch by 14 7/8 inch strip, then template A, once you do the second template A, would fit right to the end of your strip. I'm just drawing in the line there, and again I would cut that on the line to create my second template A like so. And remember, don't forget to cut out that little notch at the end of your template A. So there you go, that's my first cut. That was from the 6-inch strip. I had one 6-inch square each from that 6-inch strip that I cut, and then I cut 2 template A's from each one of my fabrics there. Next, we'll move on to the 10¼ inch strip. The 10¼ inch strip that we cut first from our fat quarters is actually for the leaf blocks. And so what we're going to do is unfold it, and you can see I've got 2 fabrics there still, cutting both my fat quarters at the same time. This is one 10¼ inch strip by 21 inches. That's the length of the fat quarter. And I'm just going to make 2 10¼ inch squares out of this. So I want to take off the absolute minimum at this edge to create a straight edge if I can. These are going to be done as half square triangles first for our leaf block next week when we get into that. We're going to start with 10¼ inch squares first before we make half square triangles. So there you go. It's that simple. I've got now 2 10¼ inch squares from each of my fabrics that were paired together. Right, so just to review, our first cut that we did was from our first pair of fat quarters, orange fat quarters. We paired together 2 oranges to make the flower petals and the leaf petals. From each of our fat quarters, and now we would do this with all of our fat quarters, we got 2 10¼ inch squares, 1 6-inch square, and 2 template A's. This was actually a 5-inch strip by about a 15-inch long strip, and then I cut my 2 template A's. Make sure that your fabric is unfolded when you cut this. We're going to go ahead now and cut the rest of our fat quarters just like this. If you want to keep your pairs together, you can. However, as you go through making your blocks, remember, you can kind of mix and match. And just make notes for yourself. These 2 10¼ inch squares are going for your leaf block. That's 1/2 of the leaf block. These 3 pieces here, the 6-inch square and the 2 template A's, are for your flower block. All right, the next cut we have to make is to our background fabric. Now this is a 1/2 yard that I called out, so this will make 1 flower block and 1 leaf block. If you are making the full-on lap quilt here, which is 6 flower blocks and 6 leaf blocks, you would need 3 yards of fabrics, and the cutting directions that you should follow are on pages 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the pattern. So you should cut all the units that you will need to make the full lap quilt. If you're just dipping your toes in or you don't want to pre-cut all that yet, then go ahead and cut off about a 1/2 yard of your background fabric, or get a 1/2 yard. I've switched my cutting board so you can see this a little bit better. I've already put it on the straight of grain here, and I've cut a straight edge for myself to start cutting with. Now I'm going to call out the cutting directions here for just making 1 leaf block and 1 flower block. Again, if you're making more blocks, you're going to have to cut multiples of what I give you here, or follow the directions in the pattern. So the first cut I'm going to make, and again this is doubled over, so I'm only cutting half my distance. So this is the selvage edge here. I've put it on the straight of grain, and then I've folded it in half again. So I'm only cutting through about 11 inches here. But the whole strip is there. So I'm going to cut a 5.5 inch strip first. Now the background fabric is going to then be subcut into template shapes and also squares and strips for our flower and leaf block. So this is a 5.5 inch strip by the width of fabric, and that's going to take template C. So I'm going to put my template C right on that strip and put it off to the side. We'll do that in just a minute. The next strip I'm going to cut is a 5-inch strip by the width of fabric. There you go. And that's a 5-inch strip, and that's going to be for template B. So I'm going to put template B on that and put it off to the side as well. What's left is I have to cut some 6-inch squares from here for the flower blocks, and I have to cut some 2 3/4 inch by 5-inch strips, as well as some 2 3/4 inch squares. And again, this is all in the pattern, but this is if we're just making 1 leaf block and 1 flower block to start with. So I'm going to cut a 6-inch strip. There's my 6-inch strip, and the rest of it goes away. Now, to make the 1 flower block and 1 leaf block of this 6-inch strip that I just cut, I'm going to cut 2 6-inch squares. So I'm going to take the selvage off here, and I'm going to cut myself the 2 6-inch squares from this end. This is doubled up now. So I've got 2 6-inch squares right there. And then I'm going to take what's left here and cut 2 2 3/4 inch strips. So I just doubled it up again, and here's my first 2 3/4 inch strip. And here's my second 2 3/4 inch strip, and I should be left with just a sliver there, which gets put in the scrap bin. Of these two, I'm going to move these over to the side. And we'll get back to those in just a minute. Of these two 2 3/4 inch strips I just cut, I need to cut out of this strip 4 5-inch by 2 3/4 inch strips. So we know it's already 2 3/4 inches wide, so I'm just going to cut, that's 2 5-inch by 2 3/4 inch strips, and here come 2 more. So that is going to be for my flower block. So this is part of the cornerstones in the flower block. What's left here I might as well cut up. I need 4 2 3/4 inch squares here. So there is 2, and I'm going to use this other strip that I cut to make the other 2. Let me just unfold it, throw that off to the side, and we'll get 2 2 3/4 here out of this strip. This can go off to the side for extra when you need it. And let's talk about what we just cut before we get back to the template. So we've got 1 2 3 4 2 3/4 inch squares. That's for our cornerstones. You can mark those if you want. We've got 1 2 3 4 5-inch by 2 3/4 inch strips. That's for our cornerstones. So we'll put all this on one side. This is for our cornerstones in the flower block, which we'll get to in week 4. And we've got 2 6-inch squares here, and that is for our flower block as well. Now we'll jump over and cut template B and C. Okay, moving on with, let's start with template B. This was a 5-inch by width of fabric strip. This particular strip you are going to need to unfold completely, and take your template B and start to draw in. The tips of template B should match or meet the edges here and here of the 5-inch strip. So again, I'm just going to draw that line of template B, make sure I draw these little notched corners of the triangle that have to be taken off, and then I would flip template B just like this to get my next template shape out of it. Now this is for the flower block, so if you're making just one flower block, go back and put that straight line in right here. If you're making just one flower block, you're going to need 4 template Bs. So save the fabric by butting up the templates straight edge to straight edge and diagonal edge to diagonal edge, and just keep drawing them in like so, unless you have made yourself a very thick template that you can cut against, which I don't really like to do. I usually like to draw in first. And you just keep flipping the template like that. You can see I'm rotating the template until you get your 4 shapes that you need, and then you just cut them out. Right, so there's my 4 template Bs. I'm going to set those aside now with the template shape. That's, again, if you want to mark this and label it, it's for the flower block, which we'll get to in week 4. Next, we'll move on to template C. Same thing. Now, these are a little different. You can keep the strip that we cut, which was a 5.5-inch wide by width of fabric strip. You can keep this folded. This is not as important to keep unfolded. Again, you take template C. It should fit snugly edge to edge on the 5.5-inch strip like you see here. Again, draw that straight edge in because you don't want to use the selvage there. Draw the curve. This is for the actual leaf block. And you're going to need 8 of these template Cs. So 8 template Cs. Now I'm getting 2 out of every time I draw it. Now this template C was put here first, and then I would just rotate it to get the best use of the fabric strip up to the top corner like that. And I can fit it snugly up against the other template I've drawn. And then I just draw in the lines for myself as a guide to cut against. And there you go. I've got 8 template C's cut. Again, I'm going to take my template, gather these up. This is again for the leaf block, which will be for next week. And that's how you cut your background fabric for 1 leaf and 1 flower block. Okay, last but not least, we have to cut up the rest of our fat quarters that were paired up for our flower centers, our leaf centers, and our flower cornerstones. I'll bring up that diagram one more time so you can see what I was talking about. Remember, we paired up fat quarters, 2 fat quarters for our flower centers, and you could use the same fat quarters for your leaf centers, or if you have extra fat quarters, you could choose 2 more to make a pair, and then you need an extra pair of fat quarters for your flower cornerstones. And this is what we'll need to cut in order to do 1 leaf block and 1 flower block. So from our flower centers here, I've got 4 3-inch squares from 1 fabric and 4 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch squares from the other fabric. I just happen to like my flower centers to have like a darker center, so this will be the center of the flower itself. It'll create like a little center to the flower block. So again, that's 4 3-inch squares, 4 1.5 inch squares. From our leaf center fat quarters that we chose, they can be the same or they can be scraps or something different. You will need 2 4 3/4 inch squares from fabric 1 and 2 4 3/4 inch squares from fabric 2. For the flower cornerstones, these are the green that you see in the diagram. You will need, from your 2 fat quarters you've chosen to be for your cornerstones, you'll need 2 3.5 inch squares from fabric 1 and 2 3.5 inch squares from fabric 2. So again, this is for the flower center, this is for the leaf center, and this is for the flower cornerstones. And with all of that cut now, we're ready to go for week 3, where we're going to start making the leaf block. That's it for week number 2. We're going to see you next week for week number 3, where we're going to start making this beautiful leaf block. Right here, we're going to learn some curve piecing. Don't forget, week 4, we're going to then concentrate on the flower block. So I will see you next week to start on the leaf block. Happy Colourwerx quilting, everybody.